The fluorescent lights hum at a frequency most people stop hearing after the first week. Katie Rodriguez hears it now, at 0600, the way she hears the ventilator 3 rooms down wheeze its mechanical rhythm, not as background noise but as data. Vital signs of the building itself. She moves through Oak Creek Memorial's pediatric wing in San Diego with the kind of precision that looks unremarkable to anyone not trained to recognize it. Restocking crash carts. Checking 4 lines. Her fingers tracing each item in a sequence that has nothing to do with hospital protocol and everything to do with the way supplies are arranged in field hospitals when seconds matter more than comfort. The worn scrubs she wears are the color of sea foam after a storm. Under the left cuff, a scar runs the length of her forearm in a thin white line, the kind that only appears when you've learned to stop flinching. Her hair is pulled back so tight it lifts the skin at her temples, a style that lets you see everything, eyes first, then the sharp angle of her jaw, then the absolute stillness of her face when she's concentrating. There is nothing about her that demands attention. This is intentional. Room 314. 8-year-old Miguel Torres sits in his wheelchair with the posture of someone who's learned to conserve energy. His complexion carries the grey undertone of a child whose body is working harder than it should just to keep the basics running. His father, Captain David Torres, Army Ranger, stands beside the wheelchair with his hand on his son's shoulder, the kind of contact that speaks less of affection than of tether. Anchor. Refusal to let the current take what matters. The shortness of breath started 3 weeks ago, the captain is saying to the chart in Katie's hands. He's not looking at her, not really. He's looking through her to the doctor who will come next, the one with authority stamped in leather and confidence. Chest pain when he exerts himself. Gets worse at night. Katie makes a note. Not the standard vitals that other nurses record. She listens to Miguel's chest with a stethoscope she bought herself, an older model, German-made, the kind that catches the small sounds others miss. The pericardial friction rub is there. Not loud. Not obvious. Just there, like a whisper under the respirations, like something rubbing against something else it shouldn't be rubbing against. How long, she asks. The captain's eyes focus on her for the first time. He sees a nurse. Mid-30s, unremarkable, the kind of person you look through to find someone more important. 3 weeks. Katie writes it down. Pericardial friction rub. Persistent chest pain. Shortness of breath on exertion. 3 weeks. Not septic. Not cardiac in the traditional sense. Something else. Something specific. The kind of detail that matters when you know what you're looking for. Has anyone done an echocardiogram? She asks. 6 doctors. No echo. Just chest x-rays. They said the lungs were clear. The captain's jaw tightens. 6 different doctors in 6 weeks. None of them looking at him the way you just did. Katie says nothing. She's already moving to Miguel's bedside, checking before sight, clean, no phlebitis, good blood return. The hands-on part. The part where the work happens. She's gentle with him, the way people are gentle with things that matter. Careful. Attentive. The kind of presence that makes an 8-year-old boy stop fidgeting because he can feel the difference between someone touching him and someone actually seeing him. The captain watches her. Most people don't watch nurses. They watch doctors. But the ones who've spent time in medical situations, who've lived in the compressed reality of a sick child, they learn where actual knowledge lives. It doesn't always wear a white coat. Thank you, he says. It's not what he means to say. What he means is, you're the first one who stopped looking at my insurance card and started looking at my son. Katie nods. A small movement. Economical. The kind of nod that says I understand and also says I have work to do. She finishes her documentation, dates it 0624, her handwriting small and precise. Each letter formed with the kind of control that speaks of someone who learned to write in darkness or in the back of a moving vehicle or under other circumstances that required absolute steadiness. Dr. Sterling arrives for rounds at 0647. His shoes click against the linoleum in a rhythm that sounds like authority itself, Italian leather, expensive, the kind that costs more than Katie's monthly rent. He's tall in the way that matters in hospitals, the way that makes him visible first in any room. His stethoscope hangs around his neck like a medal. He carries a tablet that contains everything, charts, labs, the small accumulations of data that determine what happens next. Katie feels his eyes follow her as she exits room 314. The sensation is like being tracked by something that's learned to move quietly. She doesn't turn. She doesn't acknowledge it. She continues to the next patient room, where a 5-year-old with asthma needs her feeding tube position checked and her oxygen weaned by 1 liter, a decision that will require someone to actually watch the child's chest rise and fall rather than rely on what the monitor displays. But Dr. Sterling's attention has locked onto her notation. He stands in Miguel's doorway, his eyes moving across the chart with increasing precision. Then he's photographing the page with his phone. The shutter sound is barely audible, a small electronic click that no one else notices because everyone is thinking about their own problems, their own emergencies, their own carefully constructed lives. What none of them know is that Dr. Sterling has been billing pediatric cardiology consultations for patients who never saw a cardiologist. Phantom consultations. He submits the codes, $3,400 per consultation, and the hospital system processes them because the paperwork looks correct. 5 consultations per month. 20 per month if you count the duplicates. The money arrives in an account registered to his wife's maiden name. It's the kind of scheme that works for months, sometimes years, until someone starts reviewing the charts with the kind of attention that Katie Rodriguez brings to everything. 7 months. That's how long he's been doing it. 7 months of phantom consultations on pediatric cases. Unnecessary procedures billed as necessary. Parents confused about why their children are undergoing additional tests. The system grinding forward because no one has time to question the details. Until now. Dr. Sterling steps into the break room where Katie is documenting the asthma wean on the 5-year-old. The room smells like old coffee and the particular staleness that comes from recycled air and the collective stress of people who've been awake for too long. He sets his tablet down with deliberate casualness, the kind of casualness that is the opposite of casual. Chart review, he says. Katie continues typing. Vitals and assessment documentation. You made a notation about pericardial friction rub on the Torres child. I heard it. Katie's fingers don't pause on the keyboard. 3-week history of chest pain. Exertional dyspnea. The friction rub is a new finding. Should be documented. Dr. Sterling moves closer. His presence makes the air pressure change, the way it does when a larger object enters a smaller space. I've reviewed that patient extensively. The chest X-rays are clear. The EKG is normal. You're hearing things. Katie stops typing. She turns. Her eyes meet his with the kind of steadiness that comes from someone who has looked directly at worse things than an angry doctor. I heard what I heard. You've been here 3 weeks. His voice drops. Not menacing. Just factual. Just clarifying the hierarchy. You don't know our protocols. You don't know which findings matter here. We use evidence-based practice, not hunches. The words hang in the break room air like smoke. Katie feels the weight of them. Feels the clear message underneath, you're new. You're temporary. You don't belong here yet. She stands. Her movements are fluid, unremarkable. She slides the chair back and meets his gaze directly. A pericardial friction rub is a clinical finding. It means there's inflammation around the heart. That's not a protocol question. That's a medical fact. Dr. Sterling smiles. It's not a warm smile. It's the smile of someone who's just confirmed what he suspected. Write your little observations. But I'll handle the clinical decisions. That's what my degree is for. What happens next is almost nothing. Katie's face doesn't change. Her breathing doesn't shift. The trembling isn't fear. It's restraint, the kind that comes from a decade of military service, from situations where the wrong word meant dead friends, from learning that composure is the most dangerous thing you can carry into a room. She picks up her phone instead. Steps out of the break room. The hallway stretches in both directions, fluorescent lit and endless, smelling of antiseptic and the faint copper undertone of blood from the trauma bay downstairs. She doesn't cry. She doesn't tremble. She pulls up her messages and reads the one that arrived at 0613, the one from the contact listed only as Hawkeye. Status check. You're due. She stares at the message. The one that will trigger everything. The one that means she can't stay hidden much longer. That the person she used to be is about to collide with the person she's become. In room 314, Captain David Torres sits beside his son's wheelchair and watches the monitors display numbers that all the doctors have assured him are normal. He touches the tattoo on his forearm without thinking about it, the word Phoenix in script, inked there 7 years ago in a field hospital in Ramadi by a medic who pulled him out of a collapsed building and saved his life. The same medic who disappeared after a classified operation went sideways. The same medic whose face he can't quite remember, though her call sign is permanent on his skin. He has no idea that the person in this hospital who finally listened to his son is the woman he's been looking for. He has no idea that her jacket is hanging in a locker downstairs with a unit patch sewn inside the lining, the same patch she cut from her own uniform and gave him in Ramadi, the day she pulled him from the rubble. Dr. Sterling leaves the break room and returns to his office. He closes the door. He makes a phone call to someone whose title he never fully explains but who seems to understand immediately what needs to happen. He says 3 words, "We have a problem." Then he waits. Because he's learned that the best way to handle complications is to make them disappear before they become problems anyone else notices. And that's when the real nightmare begins. Dr. Sterling's voice carries through Miguel's room like a blade being sharpened against stone. It's 1,400 hours on a Tuesday, and he's positioned himself between Katie and the door, his tailored white coat pristine, his surgical mask hanging around his neck like a general's decorations. The boy sits in his wheelchair, small even for 8, and his father, Captain David Torres, stands rigid beside him, one hand on Miguel's shoulder as if anchoring his son to earth. Nurse Rodriguez, explain to Captain Torres and myself why you administered acetaminophen at 0800 when I clearly ordered ibuprofen. Sterling's voice doesn't raise. That's what makes it dangerous. Controlled. Surgical. Behind them in the hallway, Katie can see 3 families have stopped walking. One mother pulls her daughter closer, watching. The hospital corridor has that particular quality of silence that comes right before something breaks. Katie doesn't flinch. She moves to the wall-mounted tablet with the smooth efficiency of someone who has done medical procedures in sandstorms, who has learned that hesitation kills. Her fingers find the digital chart in 3 seconds flat. Your order was logged at 0757 for acetaminophen 15 mg per kilogram. That's what I administered. Sterling steps closer to the screen. His jaw tightens. She can see the moment he understands he did order Tylenol. His own handwriting is there. Digital timestamp. Witnessed by the system. The chart doesn't lie the way people do. Don't quote the computer at me, clipboard. His voice drops lower, which somehow makes it worse. I wrote ibuprofen in my notes. Are you calling me a liar in front of a patient's family? The nickname lands like a punch. Clipboard. Like she's not a person, just a tool for documentation. Captain Torres shifts his weight, his hand tightening on Miguel's shoulder. The boy's eyes dart between the adults, trying to read danger the way children do, trying to understand if his father is about to leave him or stand his ground. Katie takes one measured breath. Her spine straightens. She stood in operating rooms during 120-degree heat with 3 hours of sleep and a 2-pound infection in her abdomen, watched people die from decisions that took 3 seconds, learned that staying calm isn't weakness, it's a weapon nobody sees coming. The chart shows exactly what you ordered, doctor. I administered precisely what you prescribed. One tear escapes. Just one. It slides down her left cheek and she wipes it away without breaking eye contact, the gesture so controlled it looks like a reflex she'd erased 20 years ago. I've seen what integrity looks like under fire, doctor. This isn't it. The room goes absolutely still. The fluorescent lights hum their electric song. Sterling's face flushes dark red, the color of a man discovering he has no leverage, no control, no way to make this disappear. My office. Now. It's not a question. It's a command, and it carries the weight of institutional authority. He's been here 12 years, she's been here 4 months. Everyone knows who wins those battles. Katie follows him down the corridor. The three families continue staring. One of them, she realizes, is filming on their phone. Sterling doesn't notice. He's already calculating his next move, already understanding that direct confrontation won't work because Katie won't break, won't cry in front of him, won't give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. In his office, he closes the door. Your performance on this unit is becoming a liability, Nurse Rodriguez. The charge nurse has filed concerns about your work patterns. You question my orders. You second-guess clinical decisions. That's not how Oak Creek Memorial operates. Each sentence is crafted, controlled, a man who has learned to weaponize bureaucracy. I'm initiating a performance improvement plan. Effective immediately. You'll be supervised on every patient interaction. Any further insubordination will result in termination and a report to the state board. Katie stands in front of his desk, her hand steady. Understood, doctor. You're dismissed. The break room at 1530 feels smaller than it did this morning. Katie unwraps her lunch, a sandwich she made at 0500, the bread already slightly stale, and sits at the corner table where she always sits, where no one ever bothers her, where quiet people are supposed to belong. The television in the corner plays a news broadcast nobody's watching. Rain hammers the windows facing west, the sound like distant gunfire, familiar and distant. Nurse Chen glances at her, then stands immediately, gathering her things. Followed by Nurse Park. Then respiratory therapist Jenkins. In rapid succession, 7 staff members rise, not frantically, but with the coordinated efficiency of people who have made a decision together, who have chosen sides. They leave the break room in the space of 40 seconds, their loyalty to Sterling's 12-year tenure at Oak Creek Memorial outweighing any instinct toward fairness. The message is clear as trauma protocol: stay associated with Katie Rodriguez and you're choosing to side against the doctor who can determine your schedule, your assignments, your future at this hospital. Katie eats her sandwich alone. The wall clock ticks audibly, one of those old institutional clocks that sounds like a heartbeat, for beats per second, relentless and measuring. She counts the beats. 120 clicks per minute. She's measured time like this before, in field hospitals, in transport vehicles, in the darkness before operations. Waiting is a skill. Patience is a weapon. But even weapons get tired. By 1600, the performance improvement plan appears on the unit board beside the staff schedule. Not in a folder. Not confidential. Posted on the wall where every passing family, every visiting relative, every patient's child can read her name in bold letters: Katie Rodriguez, performance improvement plan, insubordination, medication documentation errors, failure to follow chain of command. The unit secretary won't meet her eyes when Katie passes. That's the final punctuation. That's how you know it's done, not when authority announces your failure, but when colleagues stop pretending you exist. In the parking lot, rain is still falling. Her 10-year-old Honda Civic looks smaller than usual, gray as the San Diego sky. Katie sits in the driver's seat with the door still open, engine off, and allows herself exactly 2 minutes to feel it. Her hands finally shake the way they never did in Ramadi, never did under fire, never did when she pulled Captain Torres from rubble with her name carved into his bone marrow. The trembling isn't fear. It's restraint finally breaking, the weight of staying invisible, of being erased twice, once by the Pentagon and once by this hospital, by Dr. Sterling who doesn't even know he's standing next to a legend. She thinks about the jacket hanging in her locker downstairs, the one with the faded Phoenix unit patch sewn inside the lining, the patch she cut from her own BDU top and gave to Torres on the worst day of both their lives. She thinks about the promise she made, never surface. Complete the erasure. Live as nobody. Protect the classified operations by staying disappeared. Her phone buzzes. 16 missed calls from a Virginia number she doesn't recognize. Sterling is already making calls. Over the next 4 days, Katie watches Sterling's network activate like a military operation she wasn't supposed to see. Each move precise. Each escalation calculated. On Tuesday, the hospital board chair Dr. Morrison makes an unannounced appearance on the pediatric unit, observing Katie's medication pass with a clipboard and the kind of frown that suggests someone has already briefed him on exactly what to look for. She knows how this works. She's seen officers systematize the removal of subordinates before. Document everything. Create paper trail. Build the case so airtight that even the accused can't argue the evidence. Wednesday brings an email from HR, all certifications, licenses, and prior employment verification required within 48 hours. Katie's throat tightens reading it. Her records were scrubbed after the Syria operation went sideways, after the extraction went black ops and her entire existence got filed into classified servers under code names that don't appear in civilian databases. Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez was officially erased in 2017. She exists now only as Katie Rodriguez, civilian nurse, with a mysteriously short resume that shows nothing before 2018, no military background, no explanation for the 7-year gap. Thursday, she's standing in the medication room restocking saline bags when she overhears Sterling on his phone through the cracked door. Yes, I need a complete background check. Last name Rodriguez. First name Katie. No middle initial on file, which is itself suspicious. Something doesn't add up. His voice carries the satisfaction of a man who smells blood in the water. I want to know where she was before 2018. I want to know why there's nothing. Nothing. Complete background check, priority. On Friday, when Captain Torres requests Katie specifically for Miguel's afternoon assessment, the charge nurse, guided by Sterling's explicit instructions, reassigns her to the surgical floor. Dr. Sterling's orders. You're not to have solo patient contact pending your performance review. Katie finds the captain in the hallway at 16:30, his face drawn, his uniform crisp but his eyes carrying the weight of a man whose child is deteriorating and nobody's listening. The other nurses are competent enough, he says quietly, glancing around to ensure Sterling won't catch him talking to her. But you're the only one who actually listens when Miguel describes his chest pain. You ask follow-up questions like you're looking for something specific. Katie's mind moves through differential diagnosis like a combat medic assessing catastrophic bleeding. Positional chest pain. Friction rub on auscultation, something the other staff missed or ignored. Progressive dyspnea over 72 hours. Textbook pericardial effusion. Cardiac tamponade if the fluid continues accumulating. And Sterling's blocked her from examining him, from documenting her findings, from doing the only thing that matters. Captain, you need to demand an echocardiogram. Tonight. Insist. Tell them you won't accept refusal. Her voice is steady but carries an urgency she can't fully mask. Your son's chest pain isn't normal childhood anxiety. Demand the imaging. He studies her face with sudden concentration, like someone trying to remember where they know a stranger from. You remind me of someone. A medic I knew, long time ago. In Ramadi. She pulled me out of a collapsed building. Saved my life. He touches his forearm unconsciously, where the tattoo sits beneath his uniform sleeve. Phoenix. That was her call sign. Katie turns away before he can see her face, before she can see recognition dawn, before the erasure she's maintained for 7 years cracks under the weight of his proximity. Take care of your son, Captain. That evening, around 19:30, Sterling's assistant delivers the paperwork with barely concealed satisfaction. You're suspended pending investigation of credential falsification. Effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your badge and access credentials. Katie hands over everything without argument. The badge. The stethoscope. The access card. Security escorts her to her locker where she retrieves only one item, the jacket with the faded phoenix patch sewn inside the lining, the piece of herself she's been keeping alive through erasure and invisibility. She doesn't retrieve her personal belongings. She leaves everything else, the photo of her family she keeps in her locker, her lunch bag, the spare shoes. She walks out at 19:47 hours, and from the third floor above her, Miguel Torres's monitor alarm begins to sound, a high-pitched electronic scream that nobody answers quickly enough, a bell that Sterling will ignore, a child that Katie could have saved if the system hadn't been designed by men like Sterling to protect themselves first and children second. Over the next 4 days, Dr. Sterling's network activated like a coordinated military operation. He didn't move fast. He moved smart. First call came at 0800 on Wednesday. Richard Bancroft, board member, the kind of man who kept favors in a ledger and collected them like interest. Sterling had written off Bancroft's gambling debts once. $15,000. Bancroft remembered. I need this handled quietly, Sterling said into his office phone, the door locked, his voice steady as a scalpel. Unauthorized procedures. Chart falsification. I'm building documentation. I need you to prepare the board for a termination hearing. Bancroft didn't ask questions. That was the arrangement. Done. I'll call Henderson in HR. The second call came that same afternoon. Sterling to Henderson directly, his tone shifting, now the concerned physician, now the administrator protecting patients. There's a nurse on pediatrics. Rodriguez. She's been altering medication documentation, and frankly, I'm concerned about patient safety. I'm launching a formal investigation. I want her access suspended pending review. Henderson took notes. Henderson always took notes. By Thursday morning, the suspension letter was already printed. The third call was strategic. Sterling reached out to Dr. Chen, the attending physician, a woman he'd mentored 7 years ago when she arrived at Oak Creek Memorial fresh from residency. Katie's great, Chen had said once. Sterling had heard the admiration and stored it like ammunition. Now he used it. Chen, I need your help with something sensitive, Sterling said. Rodriguez has been documenting procedures she didn't witness. I think she's trying to build a case against me for some reason, and I need you to understand that if there's any question about her competence, we need to be on record. For the hospital. For us. The lie was perfect because it contained a fragment of truth. Katie had been documenting things too carefully. She had been asking questions. Those questions had been threats. By Friday morning, Katie's name was gone from the schedule. Her badge was deactivated. The charge nurse had already packed her locker into a cardboard box, 2 weeks of accumulated small things, a photograph of someone who might have been family, a half-eaten protein bar, the trauma shears with the call sign engraved on the handle that she kept at the bottom like a secret. Katie had left the hospital at 19:47 hours Friday evening, walking past the security desk without looking back, and Sterling watched from the 4th-floor window as her car pulled out of the parking lot. He'd won. The threat was removed. The records were safe. The fraud would continue. But that wasn't the worst part. At 02:47 hours Saturday morning, Miguel Torres's oxygen saturation alarm went off in his sleep. The numbers on the monitor dropped like a stone, 98, 94, 88, 82. His small chest heaved against the mattress, his lips turning grey, and when the night nurse rushed in, she found him sitting upright with his neck veins distended like cords pulling tight, his breathing fast and shallow, his eyes wide with the specific terror of a child who cannot understand why his body is betraying him. Captain Torres, the nurse shouted down the hallway, and Miguel's father was there in 3 seconds, pulling on his jacket as he ran, his ranger training keeping his movements efficient even as panic flooded every instinct he possessed. The rapid response team assembled in the way they'd trained 100 times, no hesitation, no wasted motion. They got Miguel on continuous monitoring, ran the EKG, called for the chest X-ray. The machine was in the hallway 3 minutes later, the portable unit, the tech's hand steady even as everyone around her moved with the controlled urgency of people who understood that children dying should not be routine but somehow always was. The X-ray showed it immediately. The cardiac silhouette was enlarged, distorted, like someone had poured water into a balloon and let it stretch beyond its limits. Water bottle heart, the X-ray tech said quietly to Dr. Chen, who'd arrived still tucking her shirt in, her eyes sharp and awake despite the hour. That's pericardial effusion. Significant. Chen didn't waste time. She pulled up the monitor and saw what she needed to see, the pulsus paradoxus, the drop in blood pressure with each breath, the textbook sign of tamponade. The fluid around Miguel's heart was compressing it, choking it, and if it kept compressing, his blood pressure would collapse into nothing. "We need a pericardiocentesis," Chen said, her voice the flat, certain tone of someone stating the obvious. "Now. We don't have time for the cath lab." The room fell silent for exactly 1 second. Then Sterling appeared in the doorway, still in the wrinkled clothes he'd slept in, his arrival timed like he'd been waiting by his phone, because he had been. The call had come in at 0247. He'd been awake. His heart had started moving faster when he heard Miguel's name. Sterling moved to the bedside, reaching for the ultrasound machine, his movements carrying the texture of someone performing competence rather than possessing it. The machine hummed to life. He reached for the probe. His hands were shaking. Captain Torres saw it. His eyes, trained by 20 years of watching people under pressure, recognized the tremor immediately. He moved closer, positioning himself so he could see the monitor, his jaw working as he watched Sterling's hand slip against the probe, watched him adjust the angle 3 times, 4 times, searching for landmarks he wasn't finding with the precision they required. "Where's Katie Rodriguez?" Torres said suddenly, his voice cutting through the sound of monitors and the ventilator that wasn't running yet but would be soon. "The nurse. Day shift. Get her. Now." The charge nurse's face went white. "Captain, she's no longer with us. Dr. Sterling suspended her yesterday." The words hit the room like a shock wave. Torres's head snapped toward Sterling, and Sterling's hands froze for exactly 1/2 second, long enough that everyone saw it, that moment of recognition that someone had just named his leverage. Torres's hand moved to his right forearm, where underneath his long-sleeved shirt, under the tattoo he'd carried for 7 years, something was clicking into place. His mouth opened to speak, but Miguel's oxygen saturation dropped again, 76 now, falling, his lips turning the color of old denim, and the moment collapsed into the architecture of crisis. "Get me the needle," Sterling said, and his voice had changed. The tremor was gone. What remained was something worse. Desperation dressed as command. 14 gauge. The ultrasound shows the pocket, I see it, there's the fluid collection. He didn't see it. His hand still shook as he positioned the needle. The probe was in his left hand, the needle in his right, and the angle was wrong and he was adjusting and Miguel's heart was failing and Torres stood motionless against the wall because moving would mean intervening and that would mean violence and this was still a hospital, still civilian, still the place where a man followed protocol even when protocol was going to kill his son. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric drone. The monitor beeped its rhythm of declining numbers. And in the parking lot, in a car that was halfway to the highway, Katie Rodriguez felt something move in her chest like a physical force, the same instinct that had pulled her from her bed in Ramadi when the building intelligence was wrong, the same instinct that had turned her car around 3 times before she'd finally driven away. She'd been driving for 7 minutes. Her hands were on the steering wheel, her foot steady on the accelerator, and something was screaming inside her, not her thoughts, something deeper, something that lived in muscle memory and years of keeping people alive when systems failed them. Katie's car made a U-turn at the next light. She was 10 minutes away from Oak Creek Memorial, driving with the same controlled intensity that had defined her career, driving back toward the hospital she'd walked away from, driving toward something her conscious mind didn't yet understand but her body already knew with the certainty of someone who'd survived by learning to feel the shape of disaster before it arrived. The kitchen entrance to Oak Creek Memorial stood exactly where it had been 7 years ago when Katie first arrived for her new life. The door was propped open, housekeeping staff moving between the loading dock and the main corridor, and she slipped through without hesitation, muscle memory overriding every rational thought that screamed at her to keep driving. Her hands were still on the steering wheel 15 seconds ago. Now they were pushing through the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time, her civilian jacket abandoned in the car, her scrub still in her locker 3 floors above. She moved like water finding its level, like something pulled by gravity toward its only destination. The code blue alarm shrieked from the pediatric wing at 0247. She heard it from the 3rd floor landing before she saw the flashing lights. Miguel's room was chaos, wearing professional masks. Dr. Sterling stood frozen beside the ultrasound machine, the probe trembling in his hands like something that might shatter if he gripped it any tighter. The attending physician, Dr. Chen, was preparing to call for a transfer to the cardiac care unit, a transfer that would take 40 minutes they didn't have. Captain Torres stood against the far wall, his hand on his son's shoulder, his jaw clenched so tight his scar tissue showed white. Miguel's oxygen saturation read 64%. The boy's lips were already taking on the grey-blue of someone whose heart could barely squeeze fluid, let alone blood. Katie didn't knock. Didn't introduce herself. Didn't apologize for existing. "Put the probe here," she said, her voice dropping into the register of someone accustomed to being obeyed in the worst moments of other people's lives. Dr. Sterling flinched back from the ultrasound machine as if it had burned him. He opened his mouth to speak, but something in Katie's posture, the way she positioned herself between him and the patient, the way her eyes had shifted from civilian nurse to something else entirely, made him step away instead. Command authority doesn't announce itself. It just occupies the space where it belongs, and everyone else adjusts. Katie positioned the ultrasound probe with 2 precise movements. The screen came alive with the echographic signature of cardiac tamponade, the pericardial effusion surrounding Miguel's heart like dark water, compressing the chambers with every beat, stealing his cardiac output 1 moment at a time. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of 50 field procedures, Fallujah, Jolin District, a trauma bay with shelling coming through the walls, a 19-year-old corpsman whose fingers wouldn't stop shaking until Katie talked him through saving a Marine's life without looking away from her own patient. "For centimeters," she said quietly. "He's in tamponade. The pressure's been building for hours." She prepped the subxiphoid area with the efficiency of someone who'd learned antisepsis under combat conditions where infection meant death at a distance. A 16-gauge needle. A 1% lidocaine wheel. The angle was there, written in the ultrasound image and in her own hand's understanding of thoracic anatomy. "Captain, hold your son's hand and don't let go," Katie said. Her voice was steady, the same voice that had once talked a 19-year-old corpsman through a battlefield amputation. Captain Torres stepped forward without hesitation, his hand finding Miguel's, and the simple act of following orders from someone who knew what they were doing seemed to settle something in both of them. Katie advanced the needle with incremental precision, feeling for the give that signals pericardial space. 23 degrees, 24, there. The needle breached the pericardial membrane and she threaded the guide wire through with the care of someone placing a life on the tip of a needle. The first 50 milliliters of straw-colored fluid filled the syringe. Miguel gasped, sudden oxygen reaching places that had been starved. "Sinus rhythm," she said, watching the monitor. Blood pressure rising. 82%. 85. 89. The oxygen saturation climbed like a ladder and Miguel's color transformed from gray-blue to something approaching human. His chest rose with easier breath. His eyes opened. Captain Torres exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a word. Dr. Chen stared at Katie's hands with open amazement, watching the steady precision of someone whose education hadn't come from textbooks. "Where did you learn to do that?" But Sterling was already on his phone in the corner, his voice low and urgent, his hand cupping the mouthpiece like a confession. "Morrison, we have an unauthorized provider performing procedures without privileges. I need security now. And call your investigator friend, I want her credentials completely destroyed." "She's still here." "She came back." He paused, listening. "Yes. She's dangerous. Get here now." Katie continued draining the fluid, 250 milliliters, then 300, then 400, while Dr. Chen watched like an apprentice seeing a master at work. The attending radiologist appeared in the doorway and simply stood there, bearing witness to something she couldn't quite categorize. Miguel's heart was no longer drowning. His blood pressure stabilized at something approaching normal. His oxygen saturation held at 94%. "He's stable," Katie said. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular. She was stating a fact, the way you state facts when emotions are luxury items you can't afford. Captain Torres didn't move his hand from his son's shoulder. His eyes had found Katie's and were searching her face with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if he were trying to match this woman to some half-remembered ghost from 7 years ago. She didn't meet his gaze. Her training was absolute, never confirm what they might be beginning to suspect. By 04:30, the security guards arrived with the house supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Hutchins who'd worked at Oak Creek Memorial for 16 years and whose hands were shaking as she held the termination notice. The guards were professional about it, the way guards are when they understand they're witnessing something their paycheck doesn't prepare them for. "You performed medical procedures without privileges," Hutchins said, not meeting Katie's eyes. "You're suspended as of this morning. We're filing a report with the State Board for unauthorized practice of medicine. You're banned from the premises immediately." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. They gave her a cardboard box. Her lunch container from the locker. A photograph of Miguel from 3 weeks ago, when he was healthy enough to smile without struggling for breath. Her backup badge from the supply closet. Everything except the jacket, which she'd left in her car. Captain Torres moved forward, his hand coming off Miguel's shoulder, but one of the security guards stepped between them. "She needs to leave, sir." Professional, apologetic, utterly final. Katie took the box without protest. She'd been disappeared once already. She knew the protocol for vanishing. The guards escorted her down the back stairwell, the same kitchen entrance she'd used to return, and Dr. Sterling made 2 more calls before the sun came up. One to the State Board, upgrading his complaint to criminal charges. One to an investigator friend, demanding they expose Katie's falsified identity. By 0600, Katie was sitting in the waiting room at the San Diego Veterans Affairs Hospital with $73 in her wallet and paperwork for disability benefits under a name that existed nowhere in any military database. A name that was legally hers because the government had written her out of existence, had buried her service record so deep that pulling it would constitute a national security violation. She'd been ordered to disappear after Syria went sideways, after an operation that couldn't be discussed had gone wrong in ways that couldn't be fixed. The Navy had scrubbed her records, given her false documentation, and told her with the flatness of men who didn't negotiate, if she surfaced, if she spoke, if anyone ever found out, they would prosecute her for treason. No one was looking for Katie Rodriguez, Navy combat medic. Katie Rodriguez didn't exist in any form the government acknowledged. She sat among the broken veterans she once would have treated, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the window where the San Diego sun was coming up over the city like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Everything was ending. Everything was exactly as it had to be. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that somewhere 3 miles away, in a pediatric ICU bed, Miguel Torres was breathing easily for the first time in 4 days, and his father was standing beside him holding his hand, and neither of them would ever know the name of the woman who'd saved the boy's life. Katie had made sure of that. She'd stepped back into the shadows before Captain Torres could finish recognizing her face, before he could ask the questions that would lead other people to answers that would ruin what little peace she'd managed to build. She filed the paperwork at 0800. The VA nurse who processed it didn't look closely enough to see the tremor in Katie's signature. By 0930, Captain David Torres walked through the door of the VA hospital carrying Miguel's discharge papers and a single demand that his voice made sound like an order: find the nurse who saved his son. Captain David Torres walked through the VA hospital's main entrance at 0900, Miguel's discharge papers clutched in one hand like evidence. The boy sat in his wheelchair, color returning to his face in a way that felt like a second birth, and Torres had one mission: find the nurse who saved his son's life. He'd asked the ER staff. Blank stares. He'd called Oak Creek Memorial 3 times. Each call bounced to different departments, different excuses. Nobody knew. Nobody was talking. So Torres came to the VA, to the waiting room where veterans sat in worn chairs with the particular exhaustion of people who'd already survived the worst, and he stood there with a single demand burning in his chest: if you won't tell me her name, I'll find her myself. That's when he saw her. She sat alone on a bench near the window, her posture the kind that comes from years of not wanting to take up space, dressed in civilian clothes that fit like a disguise. Blonde hair pulled back. Scarred hands resting on her lap. And eyes that met his with a recognition so immediate and so complete that Torres stopped breathing. 7 years. The building in Ramadi. The concrete dust. Her hands on his chest, dragging him toward light. The voice saying, "I've got you, Lieutenant. I've got you." He'd searched for her 1,000 times in his head, tried to match a face to a voice that had saved his life and given him the strength to save Miguel's. His hand moved to his forearm without his conscious permission, fingers finding the tattoo beneath his sleeve, Phoenix, etched in black ink, the call sign of the Navy medic who'd pulled him from the rubble. Torres approached slowly. His feet moved on their own. One step. Then another. The waiting room around him seemed to fall away, the fluorescent lights and the hum of the heating system and the cough of a veteran 3 seats over, all of it faded. Katie didn't stand. She didn't need to. Her entire body shifted toward him, the way a compass needle finds north, and when he was close enough to speak without the whole room hearing, when he was standing in front of her with his hand on that call sign, he whispered the single word that changed everything. Phoenix. The sound came out broken. 7 years of wondering. 7 years of a name with no face, a voice with no identity. Phoenix. The call sign hung in the air between them like a door opening to a room they'd both been standing outside of, and Katie's eyes, which had been guarded and tired and carefully neutral, suddenly overflowed with something that looked like coming home. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her mouth opened slightly, and then closed, and that was enough. That was everything. A VA nurse standing at the intake desk, young, sharp-eyed, the kind who noticed things, heard the name. Phoenix. She looked up from her computer screen and something in her expression shifted like weather changing. She stood without being asked. Moved toward the records room with the urgency of someone who'd just realized she was holding pieces of a puzzle that mattered. 2 minutes later she returned with a file, old-fashioned paper in a manila folder, and her hands trembled as she opened it. Her voice, when she read it aloud, carried through the waiting room with the weight of a courtroom verdict: Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez. Navy Combat Medic. Active duty 18 years. Medical discharge, classified circumstances, 2017. The waiting room didn't move. The veteran with the cough paused mid-breath. Another man lowered his newspaper. Because somewhere in that simple recitation of rank and name and service, something fundamental shifted. Not a nurse. Not just a nurse. Senior Chief. The highest enlisted rank in the Navy Medical Corps. The title given to people who had seen things and survived them and then spent their entire existence making sure other people survived too. Torres's eyes never left Katie's face. His hand was still on the tattoo. His son sat behind him in the wheelchair, small and alive and present in a way that 7 hours earlier had seemed impossible. And then the waiting room door opened again, and the man who stepped through had silver threading through his hair and decorations on his chest and the particular bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years carrying weight. Captain Raymond Holloway. Torres's former SEAL team leader. The man who'd stood over Torres's body in Ramadi with his hand on Torres's shoulder and said, "We don't leave our people." Holloway's eyes found Katie in an instant, and his face, weathered, scarred, worn from 1,000 difficult choices, softened in a way that made the entire room understand they were standing in the presence of something that mattered. He spoke. Not loud. Not angry. Just factual, like he was reading a casualty report, but his voice carried through the waiting room because that's what voices like his did. They filled space. They commanded attention. Silver Star. He paused. The waiting room heard it. Bronze star with Vela. Another pause. The sound of someone shifting in their chair. The fluorescent lights humming their mechanical hymn. Bronze star with Vela. Again. Again. And a third bronze star with Vela. Holloway stepped closer to Katie, and his voice dropped another octave, became something almost like a prayer. Purple heart. Purple heart. Then, silence. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they've been standing in a room with someone they should have known. Someone whose sacrifices had been written into the structure of their own lives without them ever knowing her name. The waiting room door opened a third time. Dr. Sterling stepped through, pale as hospital walls, his jacket crisp but his hands shaking visibly. The hospital administrator had called him. The board had called him. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. He looked at the file in the nurse's hands. He looked at Holloway in his dress blues. He looked at Katie, sitting with her scarred hands folded in her lap, her eyes still on Torres, and his face underwent a transformation so complete that it looked like watching someone's future collapse in real time. The accusations he'd filed. The credentials he'd questioned. The nurse he'd publicly humiliated. The woman he'd had escorted from the building. She wasn't a nurse who'd overstepped. She was a senior chief who'd been hidden for so long that even she'd become invisible to herself. And then the investigators arrived. 2 of them, carrying tablets. They didn't look angry. Anger would have been simpler. They looked like accountants who'd found evidence of something that had been rotting for years. The first investigator held up the tablet, and the spreadsheet glowed with numbers that painted a very different picture than the one Sterling had been constructing. 47 phantom consultations. 3 cardiology consults in Miguel Torres's case alone, none of them actually performed. Billing codes for procedures that never happened. And when we expanded our review across your work history, we found the same pattern at Presbyterian San Diego and at Scripps. Sterling's voice, when it came, was small. That's not. We've contacted the FBI Healthcare Fraud Division, the second investigator said. Your billing patterns match schemes we've prosecuted in 4 states. The interesting part is the timing. Your attempt to remove Nurse Rodriguez's credentials happened exactly when? Right after she started documenting the discrepancies in her notes. The investigator's eyes, hard and clinical and unapologetic, found Sterling's. You were destroying the person who was about to destroy you. Dr. Morrison, the hospital administrator, was already on his phone. 2 conversations. 3. By 11:45, the board chair was in the waiting room, his face the particular shade of red that comes from discovering your institution had been harboring a thief. Sterling's resignation was accepted before he could formally offer it. His medical license suspension came through by email at 12:47. His malpractice insurance carrier sent a letter declining coverage at 1300. And by 14:30, Sterling was walking toward the parking lot with a box containing his personal belongings, his career in pieces, his network collapsing like a structure that had never been built on anything stronger than fear and leverage. Katie sat in the waiting room with the veterans forming a protective circle around her, and Commander Holloway made a single phone call to a friend at the Pentagon. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. When he hung up, he looked at Katie and said simply, "You're back." 6 months later, Katie Rodriguez stood in an office that overlooked the pediatric wing of Oak Creek Memorial. The same building. The same hallways. Different position. The nameplate on her door read Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez, Director of Pediatric Critical Care. The save rates in the pediatric intensive care unit had climbed 18% in the first quarter alone. Her staff treated her with the kind of respect that comes from watching someone who knows exactly how to lead because they've led under fire. On her office wall hung a framed photograph. Miguel Torres, taking his first steps after successful pericardial window surgery, his small hands gripping his father's fingers, his father wearing a jacket with something barely visible sewn inside the lining, a faded unit patch with a phoenix rising from flames, the patch Katie had cut from her own uniform in Ramadi and given to David Torres before he went back to the fight, before either of them knew they'd see each other again. Dr. Sterling sold supplemental insurance policies from a folding table outside a strip mall in the cheaper part of San Diego. His medical license had been revoked. His house was in foreclosure. His name appeared in 3 fraud investigations and 2 civil suits. The state board's published findings detailed $2.3 million in fraudulent billing across 8 years and 3 hospitals. His wife had moved out the night his suspension came through. His children didn't return his calls. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus, the security guard who'd escorted Katie out of the building with her cardboard box, the Army veteran who understood honor because he'd worn a uniform that meant something, delivered Sterling's personal belongings to his sparse apartment with a single phrase that would follow Sterling for the rest of his life: "I believe you know the way out, Doctor." Katie trained new nurses now, teaching them that competence matters more than credentials, that doing right matters more than being safe. Commander Holloway visited monthly, bringing her cases of combat medics struggling with transition, young service members who carried the weight of things they couldn't put into words. Katie took them all. The Navy had quietly restored her records with a classification level that meant she existed again, officially, with full honors restored. On certain mornings, she saw Sterling through her office window, setting up his insurance table with shoulders slumped in a way they never were when he wielded power. She felt no satisfaction, only the particular weariness of someone who has seen what people become when they choose comfort over character. True class is what you do when the lights go out. It's not the title. It's not the uniform. It's the decision you make when nobody's watching, when you could keep silent, when you could save yourself. Katie made that decision in Ramadi. She made it again at Oak Creek Memorial. And every single day, in an office overlooking the pediatric wing, she made it again for someone new. If you've ever worked for someone who tried to destroy you, someone who saw your strength and attacked it because it threatened their power, share your story in the comments. Or if you know someone like Katie, someone whose integrity cost them everything and whose integrity ultimately cost the right person everything else, drop it below. And if you want to see more stories of hidden heroes being finally recognized, hit that subscribe button. Because the ones who've seen the worst are often the ones who give the most, and they deserve to be seen.